Shana Tova. If I asked you, what is the preeminent music hall in the United States? Which hall? Carnegie or Carnegie? Carnegie. Carnegie. Do I have a show of hands? How many say it's Carnegie Hall? How many say it's Carnegie Hall? How many people here are from Scotland? They get to actually answer. Andrew Carnegie was from Scotland, and he he was 12 years old when he left. And so I think it's fair to assume that he probably pronounced his name much like the people in Scotland pronounced that name, which is Carnegie, which the fact that most of us, myself included, grew up knowing it as Carnegie Hall shows that perhaps we don't know as much about the man as we might think we do. What was Andrew Carnegie's business? Steel. Steel. You don't get more macho than that. Steel. And in the process of making billions of dollars of steel, he also made millions of enemies. He was during the time of the so-called robber barons, the rise of the monopolies, of which the Sherman Antitrust Act, go back and check your history books if you don't remember that, would eventually be formed to try and curtail. Him, along with J.P. Morgan, built a massive steel conglomerate that would control most of the United States market, indeed would control much of the global supply of steel at the time, at least within the spheres that we were dealing with. And this meant as well that he had inordinate advantage and position and power to not only buy out smaller competitors, but to crush them, and to also wield the leverage against those who sought to work under better conditions within his facilities. He was, shall we say, strongly opposed to unions, and many people were injured, some died, as union busters worked for his support. But he is also someone who gave away more than 90% of his wealth before he died, the equivalent of roughly $5 billion of philanthropy within his lifetime. Much of that was funded by the work that he had done, by selling off his steel corporation to J.P. Morgan, in fact, to make the huge conglomerate that went on. So the question is, Carnegie, was he a good man? Well, to answer that question, let's find out, shall we? Let us throw him on the scales and see where he comes out. Why is it zippers always get stuck? All right, so first of all, we have to give him a fair start. Close enough. Well, it's almost there, and the maker was only human after all. So on the one hand, he was somebody who gave generously to philanthropy. Good man, right? On the other hand, he was someone who rather ruthlessly worked to exploit his workers to make sure that he would have those funds. On the other hand, he didn't only give to philanthropy, he also gave not only to music halls, but to educational programs. Oops, I'm running out of merit. To educational programs, to hospital programs, and many more things. On the whole, where are we going to put him? Do we think that he was roughly even, roughly negative, roughly positive? Where do we find him in our final count? Well, we don't know enough about Andrew Carnegie, but for Rosh HaShanah each year, we are told that God measures us in the scale. Indeed, when we get to the beautiful prayer, Unatan HaTokef, during Musaf, this is the primary metaphor in that very, very moving section. That God is counting, measuring, weighing, and then deciding. And according to the Talmud, it's very straightforward. If the side of merit outweighs the side of demerit, you are written for the new year. You are put into the book of life. If, on the other hand, the scales were turned, Well, thanks for playing. You get a consolation prize. But that seems a little simplistic, doesn't it? Just count up one on one side, count up on the other, and it's all very good. And indeed, the rabbis of the Talmud were equally uncomfortable with this. And they said, actually, you know what you should do? You should imagine yourself, if I can get my nuts in an order. You should imagine yourself even. Nobody knows what the scorecard currently reads. Right? It's not as though we are walking through a video game where everybody has a little scale above their head glowing, and you can look at them and immediately know good person, mostly good, mostly bad, completely rotten. We don't have the luxury of that kind of heads-up display of virtual reality. We're left with normal reality, which can be a little disappointing at times. So instead, the Talmud tells us, don't imagine that you know the score. Instead, imagine you are exactly balanced. You are perfectly even. And the next thing you do, for good, for bad, that's going to tip the scale. So as you consider maybe helping somebody in need, you're thinking not just, I should help somebody in need, but you're thinking, this little extra bit is going to bring me over the edge, the tipping point. On the other hand, when you are thinking, I noticed that one of my coworkers left their purse out on their table, and they won't be back from lunch for 20 minutes. Let me just see what's in there and maybe help myself. It's a small thing, maybe a $20 bill if they still use cash. One more over here. It's not such a big deal, right? On the other hand, if I put one more in here, that means I've just tipped myself completely to the negative. I've gone past that midpoint, and now what will the new year bring me? This is the balance that our sages tell us we should look at. But I would like to argue there's still a problem with this. And the problem is not the metaphor. The metaphor is actually beautiful, that if we view ourselves as truly being balanced at every point in time, if we are not so arrogant as to think that we are fully righteous, and if we are not so horribly despondent that we think we are totally wicked, but if we imagine ourselves in the balance, then this is a beautiful motivation to guide us in each of our deeds. If we imagine that our next action matters infinitely, because it is the tipping point, it can galvanize us to do good. In all cases, no matter how trivial it may seem, because that trivial act is the tipping point. And keeping that in mind is a beautiful meditation day after day. But let's be honest, most of us have trouble with maintaining beautiful meditations, and most of us are a little bit more calculating than that. And if we imagine ourselves as being perfectly balanced, then that means I can do maybe a couple bad things, as long as I do a few more good to weigh it out. 2 bad, 3 good, and you know what? I'm golden. Because as long as it's even, then as long as I'm keeping careful count of my behavior, I can get away with it, right? Who thinks this is a good idea? No? Why not? This is Andrew Carnegie. This is the man who, for all of the faults that we threw into this bucket, did all of the beautiful things in this bucket. He must have been doing it for a reason. Why would he give billions and billions of today's dollars in philanthropy if he didn't think it mattered? Indeed, if you read through his own work, and he wrote prolifically about philanthropy and, ironically enough, opposing greed, you will see that he was adamant that this was the way society should be organized, that people should be allowed in a laissez-faire system to generate as much wealth as they possibly can, and then the people who have generated it should be allowed completely, with no government interference, to distribute it as they see fit. He made the money, he gets to give the money, and in doing so, he believed this was the height of morality. This was making the scales right. Now, Judaism has a few problems with this idea Indeed, even the Protestant Reformation had a few problems with this idea of selling indulgences, of being able to say, I need a few more tokens here, of being able to say, yes, I know that I stole, or sorry, this was the good one, wasn't it? Yes, I know that I stole and murdered and was corrupt. But you know, it may not be so bad because I did all this good stuff too. You know, so maybe I could do a little more. Oh no, I've gone too far. Okay, fine, you're complaining. I'll do a few good things to try and balance it out. Okay, a little bit more if you're still being a nudnik about it. Fine, I'll throw another $1 million into your cause. I'll write a check. Shut up. Stop complaining about all the bad I did. Haven't I done enough? Look at this. Who's given more? Indeed. Carnegie is a household name in this country because of the good that he did, whether it be the medical, educational, or cultural aspects of his life. We hold his name up as a sample of philanthropy because his bucket over here is full. But Judaism says that's not the way it works. Yes, if we have to get down to brass tacks, if we are imagining Rosh HaShanah, and we know that there has to be a dividing line as God is judging whether you are good or whether you are bad, then indeed, there is a tipping point between being mostly good and mostly bad. It's just like when a teacher says that you need to get X% to pass the test. If you get X minus 1, I'm sorry, you didn't pass. There is a line. However, this is not how Judaism tells us to live our life day in, day out. Indeed, between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, we are told very clearly to think very differently about our life. Because there is one thing that is incontrovertibly true, which is no matter how much I put into this pot of good, nothing changes in this pot of badness. No matter how much I put over there, this load didn't get any less heavy. Even though the balance says, I am rocking the world with my righteousness, and even if my righteousness is enormous to counterbalance my enormous transgressions, this is still really full. And I'll tell you, come on. Never work with kids, animals, and homemade contraptions. This is still heavy. This is still a burden. No matter how much I put over there, which may make it look in the count that yes, it's balancing it out, in reality, each of us carry these two baskets. One of them lifts us up, raises us up. That's the one over there. The other one weighs us down. And we may be able to imagine at moment to moment that we are slightly more buoyant than we are weighted. But in reality, the weight is still there. And between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur in particular, we are told, if you want to fix yourself, don't just try and put more in that bucket. Take this one and empty it. That is what will make your life different. You have to do tshuva. See if I can get that to set there. You have to take what's in that bucket and get rid of it. So you look back over your deeds, which is hard, and you have to bend down and examine them. You have to wonder, wait, did I really do what was right? Did I really treat people fairly? Have I been polite? Have I been rude? Have I been selfish? Have I been unkind? And when you realize that you have, you don't just write a check to someone else. When you realize that you have wronged others, you've ignored them, you've mistreated them, you've just, been human, trying to get through this crisis that we've had for the last year and a half, and maybe you haven't always been as patient with others, even your own family, as you should have been. Maybe you've said a few things you wish you hadn't. Maybe you've done a few things or not done a few things that you should have done differently. You can't just write a check to make it go away. You can write a check, and we'll appreciate it if it's made out the Temple Israel. Don't get me wrong. And that will definitely be on your side for merit. That will be very good. But it doesn't change the weight that's in your soul. It doesn't change the burden that you have. Instead, you have to go to the person that you have wronged. And you have to say, I'm sorry. You can explain without making an excuse. But you have to be sincere in your regret that what you did was wrong. That what you did needs to be repaired, and that you are not comfortable with the weight any longer. And then something very special happens when you do that. You take this weight, and when you fix it, it goes in the other side. It doesn't just disappear, it becomes additive. It lifts you up as you realize you don't have to live with that weight any longer. You don't have to live with that burden. It changes you. It opens up your eyes to the potential of this world as not being a place where you simply slog through it, trying not to make as many mistakes as possible and just carrying the burden when you do, but that each of those burdens can be put down by talking to the other human beings that are around you, and they are beautiful and wonderful, and they will forgive you. And if ultimately they don't, because I know that there are a few, maybe 3 or 4 actual jerks in the world, if you have sincerely regretted your behavior towards them despite them being a jerk, because you recognize it was unbecoming of you to behave that way, regardless of how much you may think they have deserved it, you did not deserve to act that way. And you don't deserve to carry that burden. You apologize, they ignore you, you walk away, you're still lighter. And you are now still a person that walks away with that treasure. And you no longer have that burden holding you down. You didn't do it for them. You did it for you. It's not an easy thing to admit that you made a mistake, or to admit that you made a mistake by omission. But it is the most transformative thing in a human being's life. It is why we have the holidays of Rosh HaShanah and Yom Kippur centered around this concept, rather than centered around the concept of being more like Andrew Carnegie. Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur tell us your life, it's in your hands. You get to decide where you want to put your pieces. You get to decide how you wish to be weighed and how you wish to be lifted up. Oh, I put them in the wrong bowl, sorry. But I can fix that. But I can fix that. It is the most optimistic of all the faiths of the world that I have ever encountered and studied. Because you can fix it, and by fixing it, you make it less likely to happen again. It's not fix and sin, fix and sin. It is fix and grow and sin less. Once you realize that you can apologize to a person sincerely and meaningfully, it becomes easier to apologize next time, and it becomes harder to commit a transgression against them or others in the same way. That is the power of tshuva, that it not only unburdens us from the weight, but it truly transforms us into a better person by making us less likely to commit those errors again. The first time you apologize to someone for having insulted them, that power to transform that relationship, to fix it. It's like learning CPR for the first time. When you realize this relationship doesn't have to die. This relationship doesn't have to be gone from my life. I can fix this. Not by pounding on the chest and doing, the breath of life, but I can fix this with an apology. By showing them regret and sincere appreciation for them, being willing to listen to me to make this right, rather than asking them to put up with me or to get rid of me. Because that's the alternative when it comes to our human interactions. You either make it right, or you put the burden on the other person to put up with you and all of your stupidity, and we are all stupid at one point or another. I'm not pointing fingers at anyone except myself. You either ask them to put up with it, them to carry it, them to be burdened with the choice in the relationship of whether to leave or not leave because of what you've done, or you go to them and say, I'm sorry. We are so special, and our relationship is so important that I cannot imagine it being gone, and I would rather go through the embarrassment of admitting my mistake than see you walk out or make you carry this without it being resolved and reconciled. And once you do that, and you see the other person's face change from uncomfortableness to a willingness to forgive, that's when you recognize that you have just found your superpower, that you have just found the way to change your life, their life, and the lives of everyone. That's why God gave us the Torah, so that we should not live in a community where no one ever apologizes, that we should not live in a community where everyone is expected to be a saint, and when they make a mistake, we kick them out of the door because now you are a sinner and you can never return. And it's why the Torah told us that you don't fix it by just piling up other things over here. For everything that Andrew Carnegie did, we should be thankful. It's the education that he has provided, the cultural joys that he has shared, the medical insights that people who have researched in his name have given us are miracles. But we should also recognize that everything that he did with those billions and billions of dollars were not directed at the people that he actually wronged. And for that he will face a reckoning before the throne. For that he will have to account in the world to come, in Olam Haba. None of us may be as rich as Andrew Carnegie. If you are, please talk to me after services. I have a few opportunities for you. But all of us can do something he couldn't. We can make it right between ourselves and others. We can make it right. It begins maybe with a phone call, maybe a text, an email, if you still use that. Begins with a conversation. Begins with, I'm sorry. And when someone comes to you, recognize what they are doing when they come before you and say, I'm sorry. And be prepared to say, it's okay. Not that it was okay, but it's okay now. And it'll get better. Shana Tova. But it'll only be Tova, it'll only be a good year if we make it so.